2 winters passed. No message, no grave, no goodbye. Just a rusted canine collar swaying on an old iron gate. And a dog once hailed a hero, now limping alone through fields of frost, waiting for a man the world had declared missing. But Ranger didn't forget, and neither did Luke. He was a decorated officer, trained for danger, sent into darkness for justice. But what he came home to was betrayal, silence, and a truth buried deeper than any war zone. What they did to his dog will break your heart. What he did next will restore your faith in loyalty, in second chances, and in the kind of love that doesn't need words. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far Ranger's story travels. And if you believe that no loyal dog should ever be discarded, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to witness will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. It was late October in Cedarfield, Oregon. The kind of small mountain town where the air always carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke, where the streets seemed quieter in the cold months, as if the town itself whispered rather than spoke. Fog rolled low over the hills, and morning frost clung stubbornly to rooftops and abandoned mailboxes. That morning, the sun hadn't yet broken through the dense gray overcast, and the silence felt heavier than usual. Luke Morgan stepped off the Greyhound bus with nothing but a military-style duffel slung over one shoulder and a folder clutched in his right hand. He was 38, tall, with an athletic frame honed from years of law enforcement, but his once clean-shaven face now carried a rough, tired stubble. His sharp green eyes had lost the shine they once held, a burnout light from too many years under cover, too many nights spent tracking ghosts in cartel territory. His boots were scuffed, his coat too thin for the coming winter, but he walked like a man who had no intention of collapsing, just unfinished business. 2 years and 2 days. That's how long he had been gone, embedded deep in a task force dismantling a human trafficking network that stretched from Arizona to British Columbia. He hadn't sent word back. No letters, no calls. It had been part of the deal. Disappear to infiltrate. Reappear only when the job was done. Cedarfield had heard nothing from Officer Morgan in 730 days. Most assumed he was dead. He walked the last 3 blocks to his old house in silence. On either side of the cracked sidewalk, the maple trees had shed most of their leaves. The lawn he used to mow every Sunday was now a waist-high wilderness of yellow weeds and brittle grass. The house, a modest 2-story with fading blue siding and peeling shutters, looked abandoned. The porch swing was gone. The flower beds choked by ivy. But it wasn't the house that stopped Luke cold. It was the gate. An old wrought-iron gate rusted with age, its hinges screeched like a warning in the wind. And there, hanging crookedly from the top rail, was a weather-worn K9 collar, tan leather, the name tag barely readable. But he didn't need to read it. He knew the shape, the texture, the scar across the second loop. It was Ranger's collar. Luke stood still for a long while, his eyes locked on that collar as if it might explain something, as if it might scream the truth. But there was only wind, no barking, no welcome, just that symbol, hanging like a forgotten medal, a tombstone for something that should never have been lost. He pushed the gate open, stepped onto the overgrown path. Every brick beneath his boots had once held memories, teaching Ranger to heal, playing fetch after double shifts, laughing with Heather on warm summer nights. Heather Moore. She had lived here once, too. Blonde, bookish, with an angular jawline and a laugh that used to cut through his worst days. She worked admin at the precinct, fiercely competent but quiet. A woman who had grown up with alcoholic parents, she rarely spoke unless it mattered. That made her dependable, but also distant. She had never liked goodbyes. So when he left, she didn't cry, just said, "Come back alive. Ranger needs you." And then she was gone. Luke climbed the porch. The doorknob was rusted over, locked, windows all drawn. He knocked once, twice, 3 times. no sound. He didn't expect any. He stepped back and stared at the structure for a final moment, then turned and walked down the path again. A few blocks away, across from the old gas station, stood the Cedarfield Police Department, a squat, beige building with a crooked flagpole and flickering security light. Inside, Lacey Green, 35, sat behind a cluttered desk. She was a black woman with tight curls pinned back and a scar on her right eyebrow from a bar fight back in '09. Everyone knew Lacey didn't do small talk. She was honest, unfiltered, and loyal to a fault. Luke and Lacey had once been rookies together. She was halfway through her second coffee when a dusty file slid from the back of a neglected drawer. She'd been archiving old K-9 transfer reports. The top page read, K-9, Ranger, Handler, Luke Morgan. Status, decommissioned. Her brow furrowed. Decommissioned? She muttered. The listed reason, behavioral instability. No longer fit for duty. Below, scribbled hastily in a different handwriting. Transferred to temporary caregiver, Heather Moore. No follow-up submitted. Lacey leaned back in her chair. Something didn't add up. Ranger was one of the top-performing canines in the entire Northwest Division. Intelligent, loyal, unshakable. For that dog to be discarded so casually, without medical reason, without reassignment, someone had buried something. And Lacey didn't like buried things. Back outside, Luke stood by the rusted gate once more staring at the caller. His breath clouded in the cold morning air. The town felt different. Not just older, but quieter, suspicious. He reached up and took the collar down gently, brushing the dust from its surface. Beneath the grime, the name tag still read, Ranger, Cedarfield PD, Badge 082. His hands closed around the leather. For the first time in 2 years, his heart cracked open. Ranger wasn't gone. Not really. But someone had treated him like trash. And Luke had just come back to find out who. The old forest road wound its way out of Cedarfield like a forgotten artery, flanked by pine and maple trees in the full blush of late autumn. Wind swept low across the fields, rattling dead leaves like bones on a drum. The sky hung low and colorless, as if the sun had given up trying to break through. Luke Morgan's pickup truck rumbled down the gravel path, tires crunching on fallen branches, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The printout Lacey had slipped him the night before, a copied address from the K-9 reassignment log, led here. Maple Hollow Kennels, a once licensed K-9 training facility that had quietly shut down during the pandemic. No public notice, no follow-up inspection. Just a place that had disappeared between the lines, like too many things in this town. As Luke turned the final corner, the property came into view. A large iron gate stood slightly ajar, rust eaten through the hinges. Beyond it, a sagging wooden sign hung sideways. Maple Hollow. Train for the brave. The words were faded and chipped, like a lie someone had long stopped believing. He parked beneath a dying oak, stepped out, and scanned the surroundings. The place reeked of abandonment. Fences with holes, kennels overtaken by moss, a training field now just a field of brittle grass. His boots thudded softly over damp earth as he walked toward the far end, near a grove of maple trees that cast long, blood-colored shadows on the ground. Then he saw it. Near the largest tree, a massive red maple with roots gnarled like old fingers, a figure lay curled in the grass. From a distance, it could have been any stray dog, but Luke knew better. The shape of the ears, the angle of the shoulders, even the rise and fall of his breathing. Ranger. 13 years old now, though his thick black and tan coat was grizzled with gray, matted in places, and thinned along the spine. One of his hind legs, his right, was curled awkwardly beneath him, barely able to bear weight. His body looked thin, too thin, ribs like ridges under the fur, but it was the eyes that hurt most. Wide, alert, and filled with a pain that hadn't turned into rage, just waiting, endless waiting. Luke stopped several feet away. "Ranger," he said softly. The dog lifted his head but didn't bark. He didn't move at first. Only his ears twitched, eyes locked on Luke's face. Then, with great effort, Ranger pushed himself to his feet, his body trembling under the effort, and limped forward. He stopped in front of Luke. There was no sound, no whimper, no tail wagging, just a quiet lean forward as Ranger pressed his forehead against Luke's thigh, then collapsed at his boots, breathing shallow, body still. Luke dropped to his knees, one hand on Ranger's head, the other clenched in the collar still looped around his belt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have come sooner." From a distance, a voice called out, "You're the guy he's been waiting for, aren't you?" Luke looked up. A boy, Noah Delaney, maybe 12 or 13, was standing by the fence. He was thin, with sandy hair, freckles across his nose, wearing an oversized hoodie with a faded superhero logo. He clutched a plastic shopping bag full of canned dog food and old bread rolls. "Don't worry," the boy added, walking closer. "I didn't tell nobody he was here. Figured whoever left him like this wasn't worth trusting." Luke stood, cautious but calm. "You've been feeding him?" The boy shrugged. "Sorta. We live just over that ridge. Mom says not to come out here, but Ranger never hurt nobody. He just watches the road. Every evening, same time. Like he's waiting for a ride that never comes." Luke approached the boy, his tone gentler. "How long has he been out here?" Noah scratched his head. "Over a year, I guess. He limps bad sometimes. I tried to tell Animal Services once, but they said they couldn't find him." Luke's jaw clenched. Ranger had been on that hill for over a year, waiting, forgotten by the system, forgotten by everyone but a kid with too much empathy and not enough voice. "You're Noah, right?" The boy blinked. "Yeah. How'd you—" "I used to patrol this road. I remember you riding a blue bike with no back tire. You crashed into a mailbox once." Noah flushed. "Oh, yeah. I remember now. You're the guy with the dog that could open car doors." Luke nodded slowly. That was Ranger. A silence hung in the air. Ranger stirred at their feet. Trying to rise again, Luke knelt down and gently placed both hands on either side of his face. "You don't have to get up," he said. "You're coming home." The words didn't mean much to a dog, not in vocabulary, but Ranger lifted his head, rested it against Luke's arm, and closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in something closer to surrender. Luke turned to Noah. "You've done more for him than anyone else in this town. I owe you." Noah looked down. "You don't. I just didn't want him to die alone." Luke felt something tight in his chest, not quite anger, not grief. Something more like shame. "I didn't think anyone still remembered him." "I think he remembered you enough for all of us," the boy whispered. That afternoon, Luke wrapped Ranger in an old fleece blanket and carried him to the truck. He laid him gently in the back seat. Noah helped gather the old food cans and stacked them in a box. Before he left, Luke asked, "Does your mom know you come here?" Noah nodded. "She does now." "Tell her thank you. And Noah?" "Yeah?" "You've got the kind of heart this world doesn't teach. Don't lose it." As Luke drove back down the gravel road, the sky darkened, and wind howled through the trees. But inside the truck, Ranger's breathing steadied, and his head rested against the window, watching the forest pass by for the first time in over a year, from the safety of a ride that had finally come. He was going home. The next morning in Cedarfield was gray and biting. A light drizzle ticked softly against the windshield of Luke's truck as it pulled into the gravel lot behind Dr. Susan Bell's veterinary clinic, a one-story brick building with cracked parking lines and a faded wooden sign that read, "Compassion Beyond the Collar." Luke stepped out and carefully opened the passenger side door. Ranger stirred beneath the fleece blanket, his eyes cloudy but watchful. Luke reached in and lifted him gently. The old dog weighed much less than he should have, a heap of bones, muscle, and memory. Inside, the clinic was warm, clean, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar shavings. At the reception desk stood Carla Dempsey, a petite woman in her late 40s with short red curls and a quick, no-nonsense attitude. She wore scrubs covered in cartoon cats but spoke like a combat medic. Walk-ins only if bleeding or breathing weird, she said, barely looking up from her clipboard. But the moment she saw Ranger cradled in Luke's arms, her tone softened. "Oh, that's different. Come through." She led them into a back exam room, then stepped out to call the vet. Luke laid Ranger on a padded table, gently stroking his ears. The dog didn't resist, but he didn't relax either, his tail still, eyes flicking between the door and Luke's face. Moments later, Dr. Susan Bell entered, early 60s, tall, lean, with silver-gray hair tied back into a braid and sharp brown eyes that seemed to catch everything at once. She wore a faded green lab coat and walked with a slight limp, an old injury from a horsefall years back, or so the town rumors said. "Luke Morgan," she said, recognizing him immediately. "Last I heard, you were off playing ghost with the feds." "Back in town," he answered, "and trying to figure out why my partner was left to rot in a field." She didn't ask for more. She moved to Ranger with practiced ease, her fingers checking joints, eyes examining gums, nose, pupils. 13 years old. Mild arthritis. One dislocated hip. Old. Not healing right. Weight's too low. Malnutrition but not starvation. He hasn't been scavenging much. Luke nodded. He waited. For me. Susan paused, hand on Ranger's side. "But the worst isn't what you can touch. This one's got trauma deeper than most dogs can carry. Has he flinched at noises? Sudden movements?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Only once. When I closed the truck door." She gave a quiet sigh. "PTSD. It's rare, but it happens, especially to service dogs abandoned during or after conflict. He's alert, but withdrawn. Knows who you are. That's what's holding him together." Luke lowered his gaze. "Can he come back from this?" Susan took a long look at Ranger. "If you don't give up on him, he won't give up on himself." Carla returned with a file folder and placed it on the counter. "We ran his chip through the registry. There's something strange." Luke opened it and froze. Ranger's chip had been transferred. The listed owner was no longer Cedarfield Police Department or himself. The record had been updated 9 months ago. The new owner, Valor Ridge Tactical Training, private division based 3 counties south in Red Creek. Luke's voice was low. "That's a civilian contractor. Ex-military trainers, some of them flagged in prior investigations." Susan raised an eyebrow. "Is that where he came from?" "No," Luke said. "That's where they sold him." The timeline was damning. Luke went dark. Within months, Heather Moore filed a request to release Ranger from active duty. Then, somehow, off the books, he was transferred to a contractor with known ties to the black market weapons trade. "He wasn't retired," Luke said. "He was trafficked." At that moment, Luke's phone buzzed. A message from Lacey. He opened it. No words, just a video file. He tapped play. The footage was grainy, from a body cam. A warehouse interior, men shouting, flashlights bouncing. And there, leashed but tense, stood Ranger, muzzle on, tail stiff, flanked by 2 armed handlers in Valor Ridge uniforms. One barked, "Move the crate, now!" Ranger didn't budge. The man reached into his belt and pulled out a handheld shock device. A zap. Ranger flinched violently, then lunged, not at the crate, but at the handler's leg, ripping through Kevlar before being yanked back and pinned. Luke's hands trembled. They used him to move contraband. Carla stepped back, horror on her face. They tortured him to make him obey. Susan's voice was quiet but firm. "You're lucky he remembers kindness at all." Luke turned to the vet. "What does he need now?" "Rest, calories, familiar places. But more than that, he needs to feel safe again. That starts with trust." Luke nodded. "He has mine." That afternoon, as drizzle turned to cold mist, Luke carried Ranger back to the truck and drove him to a small cabin he had inherited from his uncle, a 1-bedroom retreat just outside town, nestled between evergreens and overlooking a slow creek. He laid Ranger on a thick bed by the fire, lit the hearth, and left his own jacket across the dog's side like a blanket. Outside, the woods whispered. But inside, for the first time in months, Ranger didn't twitch in his sleep. He just breathed. The early light in Cedarfield broke reluctantly through the clouds. Mist still clung to the treetops like a stubborn memory, and the chill in the air carried the smell of wet dirt and old metal. Luke Morgan stood on the front porch of his uncle's old cabin, one hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the other resting on the warm head of the dog beside him. Ranger lay still, breathing slow and steady, tail twitching slightly in his sleep. There was strength coming back to the old canyon, barely, but it was there. Luke didn't sleep much, hadn't in years. But last night had been the first in a long time when the silence didn't feel like judgment. He had no intention of waiting. There were still too many unanswered questions, and now a trail. 2 hours later, Luke's pickup rumbled down a winding dirt road toward a weathered property that had once belonged to John Harwood, a former Cedarfield town contractor who disappeared 2 years ago under mysterious circumstances. The place had been used for various off-the-books activities, mostly storage. But Luke remembered it well. It was the last place he had trailed a suspect before going dark for the federal operation that stole 2 years of his life. Now he was going back, with Ranger beside him. The property was deep in the woods, hidden behind overgrown brush and rusted cattle fencing. The barn at its center sagged heavily, roof partially collapsed, windows missing. Luke stepped out of the truck, leaned in to unbuckle Ranger's harness. The dog stood slower than he once would have, but upright, determined. Luke whispered, "You know this place?" Ranger gave a low, almost inaudible growl, then moved forward, nose low to the ground. The barn creaked as they entered. Dust exploded beneath each footstep, and long-forgotten spiderwebs laced the rafters. Luke scanned the room. Crates, rusted fuel drums, scattered tools. Nothing out of place. But Ranger ignored all of it. He moved to the far left corner, paused, then began pawing violently at the floor. Luke knelt beside him. Beneath the dirt and sawdust, he found a seam. Wood panels that didn't match the rest. He pried one up, then another, and there it was. A hatch. Hidden and padlocked, but old. The lock broke easily beneath a crowbar. Luke pulled the hatch open and the smell hit first. Metal, oil, and something darker, heavier. Ranger growled again, hair bristling. Luke grabbed a flashlight, clicked it on, and descended the narrow wooden steps. The space beneath the barn was bigger than expected, a full storage cellar, probably 10 feet deep, with reinforced walls. Rows of crates, tightly packed and stenciled with serial codes that should have been destroyed years ago. He knelt beside one and flipped it open. Inside were military-grade firearms. He opened another. Explosives. Another. Body armor. High-tech surveillance gear. All of it tagged with shipping dates from 2 years ago. The same month he had disappeared during the federal raid that went sideways. Luke exhaled slowly. "This is it." Ranger barked sharply behind him, once, then twice. Luke spun. The dog stood stiff, staring toward the wall. There was something else. A steel filing cabinet. Locked. Luke yanked it open with a pry bar. Dozens of folders spilled out. Inventory logs, coded ledgers, scanned IDs. But one sheet caught his eye immediately. A photograph. Torn along the side. He pulled it free. In the grainy image, Heather Moore, unmistakable. Her blonde hair tied back, sunglasses perched atop her head. Standing beside her, a tall man in black tactical gear, face half-turned but recognizable by the Valor Ridge crest on his chest. Heather. She had denied knowing anything, swore she signed papers and moved on, but here she was, in the middle of it. Luke sat on the floor for a moment, heart pounding, fingers tightening around the photograph. Ranger came to his side, sat slowly, rested his chin on Luke's thigh. "She lied to me," Luke whispered. "She knew." He grabbed a stack of files and shoved them into his duffel. This wasn't just evidence. This was leverage. Just as he turned to leave, Ranger's ears twitched. He growled again, sharper this time. Luke's hand flew to the pistol holstered under his jacket. Outside, footsteps. Someone was coming. Luke snapped the hatch closed, whispered, "Quiet," and both he and Ranger melted into the shadows behind a stack of crates. The barn door creaked open slowly. A figure entered, mid-40s, broad frame, dressed in a canvas jacket and work boots. Not law enforcement, not local. He paused, scanned the barn, then moved straight toward the hatch. He had a key. Luke didn't wait. With a practiced move, he slipped behind the man, pressed the gun barrel to the back of his neck. "One sound, and you'll meet the floor." The man froze. "Who the hell?" "Luke Morgan, Cedarfield PD. You're trespassing." The man slowly raised his hands. "You shouldn't be here. You don't know what you're—" "I know enough," Luke said coldly. "Start talking." But the man didn't. Not another word. Just stared forward, expression blank, like someone who had already decided he'd say nothing, no matter the cost. Luke radioed Lacey. "I need a pickup and a warrant. We just found the vault." Then he looked at Ranger, who stood watchful at his side, one paw slightly raised, scarred but ready. "You're not just a survivor," Luke murmured. "You're the key to all of it." And Ranger, as if understanding, gave a single, soft bark. The rain hadn't let up. Outside the Harwood property, red and blue lights pulsed against the damp silhouette of the old barn, casting long shadows across the muddy field. Officer Jared Langston, mid-40s, burly build, with a jaw too tight for his own good, finished zip-tying the last weapons crate while Ranger sat nearby, eyes sharp under the flickering light. Inside the barn, Luke Morgan stood beside Lacey Green, arms crossed. Lacey, soaked through but unfazed, held up the torn photograph they'd just retrieved. Heather Moore, her smile frozen in time next to a man in private tactical gear bearing the emblem of Valor Ridge. It was damning, not just because of who was in it, but where it had been hidden. Luke's voice was quiet but tight. "We bring her in, tonight." Lacey didn't hesitate. "She'll be at the station in an hour." Heather Moore arrived at Cedarfield Police Department under an official summons, not an arrest. She wore a sand-colored wool coat, hair pinned back, makeup minimal, but her posture betrayed a subtle rigidity, like someone balancing carefully on a line they weren't sure would hold. She gave a polite nod to the desk officer and was escorted into Interrogation Room 2. Behind the one-way mirror, Luke watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Ranger lay at his feet, unmoving but alert, his ears perked with something too deep to name: recognition, memory, grief. "She doesn't know you're here?" Lacey asked beside him. Luke shook his head. "Not yet." He stepped out. Inside the room, Heather barely flinched when Luke entered. Her eyes widened, but only for a second. Then she composed herself, chin lifted, fingers loosely clasped on the table. "Luke," she said evenly, "I heard rumors that you were dead." He didn't sit, just placed the photograph on the table between them. Her gaze dropped. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "Under the floorboards of a smuggling bunker," Luke said, "next to crates of unregistered firearms. Same weapons linked to the sting I vanished on 2 years ago." Heather inhaled through her nose, lips tightening. "That picture doesn't mean I was involved." Luke leaned forward, voice calm. "Then tell me what it does mean, because if you don't, someone else will." Heather glanced at the mirror, knowing who was behind it. Then back to Luke. "After you disappeared, no one told me anything. I had bills piling up, a landlord threatening eviction, and no support from the department. I was desperate." "So, you sold a K-9 officer." "I didn't sell him," she snapped, then caught herself. "Not like that. A man approached me, Kincaid. Said he ran a veterans recovery ranch. He offered money to take Ranger off my hands, said he'd be retired, well-fed, safe. I believed him." Luke dropped a folder beside the photo. Inside were photos of the warehouse, the crates, the cereals. Ranger wasn't retired. He was trafficked, shocked into obedience, used to run contraband. What kind of recovery ranch does that? Heather swallowed. I didn't know what they were doing to him. Luke opened his phone and tapped a file. From the speaker came Heather's voice, recorded faintly but unmistakably. If he ever shows up, we say the dog was sick and had to be put down. He can't trace it back if the dog's out of the picture. Heather's breath caught. Where did you get that? Luke's voice dropped. Noah. The boy who lives behind the old training site. He fed Ranger for a year, hid kibble in the grass. He recorded you from his window. Heather's resolve cracked. She looked down, fingers trembling. They said if I talked, I'd be next. I tried to cut ties after the first drop. Kincaid started calling at night, threatening. And when I said I'd tell the police, he said you were already dead, and that the dog would be too. Luke let the silence linger. Then he said, You're going to write a full statement. Names, dates, drop locations. Everything. Heather wiped at her eye quickly, then nodded. Outside the room, Lacey was already preparing the warrant for Kincaid. Later that night, Luke stepped outside the precinct. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the thick scent of wet pine and asphalt. The town was asleep. But Cedarfield no longer felt like home. It felt like something waiting to be fixed. Across the street, Noah sat on the curb in a hoodie 3 sizes too big, flipping through his phone. She say anything? Noah asked as Luke approached. She said enough. Noah glanced down at Ranger, who sat beside Luke, tail gently brushing the concrete. He still looks like he's waiting for something. Luke looked into the dog's eyes, that old storm of pain and duty. He's waiting for this to be over. Noah pulled a cracked MP3 recorder from his coat pocket. I have more, he said. I deleted all the junk. Just kept the voice that mattered. Luke took the recorder, nodded once. From a nearby alley, a shadow ducked behind a dumpster, watching. And in that quiet moment, Luke knew. The betrayal went deeper than Heather. The war hadn't ended. It had only just changed shape. The Cedarfield precinct had a strange stillness that morning, as if the building itself knew what kind of ghosts were about to be disturbed. Outside, the clouds were heavy with rain but hadn't yet broken, gray like ash, pressing down on the town. Luke stood in the evidence room with Lacey and Ranger, the air sterile with cold metal, bleach, and years of sealed secrets. This was where they kept the unspoken. The room's keeper, Carmen Reyes, a short, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with deep-set eyes and hair pulled into a strict silver bun, unlocked the cold vault. Carmen was known for being meticulous, bordering on obsessive. She'd worked evidence control for nearly 3 decades and never misplaced a single label. She greeted Luke with a brisk nod. I heard they pulled you out of a grave, she said, her tone not quite warm, not quite cold. Good. We need ghosts to chase ghosts. She pulled out a box tagged case number 147-03B, the number matching the long, cold investigation that Luke himself had been working on when he disappeared. An interstate trafficking case with no leads and 1 victim still officially missing. Inside were ziplocked bags, stained fabrics, old boot prints, and vials long dried out. The kind of evidence that speaks only when someone listens hard enough. Ranger stood at attention as Luke opened the lid. His body was thin but steadier now. The trembling had lessened since the night they reunited. Still, there was a quiet reverence to the way he approached the box, ears twitching, his dark nose hovering just above the sealed items. Lacey gave a soft whistle to cue him. They laid out 3 specific pieces, an old bandana, a torn leather glove, and a shredded piece of tactical canvas from a rucksack. All had faint traces of blood, but none had been conclusively matched. Luke watched as Ranger's posture changed. He stiffened, nose twitching violently over the canvas. Then he let out a low, guttural growl and placed a paw on the item. Carmen's brows lifted. Well, he remembers. Lacey nodded, already opening a kit to swab the material again. If we get a viable sample, we'll rush the lab. Luke's voice was low. Don't send it local. I want it through Giddens Field. That was the military's independent forensic contractor, discreet, off-record, trustworthy. While Lacey boxed up the item, Luke paced to the back of the evidence room where long-forgotten file cabinets leaned against a cracked wall. Dust bloomed in the air as he slid open the drawer marked K9 Assets, Discharged. He was looking for one thing, the paper trail that gave someone the right to take Ranger. He didn't expect to find it so easily. It was a thin manila folder, tabbed R217, Retired, Transferred. Inside, a typed release form, authorizing the surrender of K9 Ranger to a third-party entity for special assignment training, signed and approved. The signature at the bottom stopped him cold. Carl Gentry, his former chief. A man with salt and pepper hair and a crooked nose from a bar fight in 1992. Gentry had been Luke's mentor, the one who'd handpicked him for the task force that took him off-grid 2 years ago. Loyal, tough, respected, or so Luke thought. Lacey glanced over his shoulder. "Is that?" Luke didn't answer, just stared at the name, hand tightening around the page. "I thought he retired," Lacey said. "He did," Luke murmured, "exactly 1 week after I vanished." They copied the file. Luke tucked the original back into its drawer. No need to make whoever left it there nervous yet. Back in the main office, Carmen returned with news. Lab confirmed partial blood match from the canvas. Not official yet, but preliminary report says it aligns with Melanie Brooks. Melanie Brooks, age 22, reported missing the same week Luke's task force disappeared. A waitress from Jackson Creek, no criminal record, no family left but a sick grandmother in a care facility. She was presumed dead. But without a body, her case was suspended. Lacey cursed under her breath. "You think Mr. K had her killed?" "No," Luke said grimly. "I think he had her moved, maybe used, and maybe she's still alive. That canvas, it came from a bag only issued to the undercover team." Lacey stared at him. "You mean your team?" Luke nodded. "And I wasn't the only one." At that moment, Ranger barked, not loud, but sharp. His gaze was fixed toward the hallway, where a young officer was walking by with a clipboard. Nothing unusual, but Luke noticed Ranger's eyes, alert, focused. Something wasn't over yet. Later that night, Luke sat alone in the locker room, the manila folder on his lap. Rain had finally begun to fall, tapping against the tin roof like a ticking clock running out. Ranger lay nearby, curled but awake. The dog hadn't barked again. Luke flipped the folder open once more. Below Carl Gentry's signature was a second stamp. Witnessed by Heather Moore. She'd signed it too. Her name looked shakier than Carl's, almost reluctant. "I don't think she knew the full picture," Luke said aloud. "But Carl did." Ranger shifted, as if understanding. Luke reached into his duffel and pulled out the black and gold patch that once sat on his uniform. Cedarfield K9 Division. Trust is earned. He set it gently beside Ranger's paw. Rain lashed the side of the old motel like a warning from the sky itself. The Midnight Pines Inn had long since lost its charm. Now a crumbling structure of rotted boards and flickering lights, perched at the edge of Cedarfield's industrial district. It had been off the grid, paid for in cash, no records, the kind of place where secrets went to rot. Luke stood outside room 9B, armored vest strapped tight, eyes scanning every shadow. Lacey flanked him, radio clipped to her shoulder, eyes hard beneath her Kevlar helmet. A small tactical team waited behind them, quiet professionals from neighboring counties, briefed but not trusted. And then there was Ranger. The German shepherd stood low to the ground, his breathing steady despite the healing wounds beneath his dark coat. His front right leg still bore a fresh bandage from the vet's visit earlier that week, but the fire in his eyes was undimmed. He didn't bark, didn't growl, he simply waited for Luke's signal, like he always had. Luke gave the nod. The breach was fast, controlled. Room 9B was a front, just stained carpet and a broken lamp, but Ranger immediately veered left, bypassing the chaos of shouting men and sweeping flashlights. He pawed at the base of a dented filing cabinet, nose twitching, Luke followed, eyes narrowing. "False floor," Luke muttered, then knelt, ran his fingers along the linoleum seam until it clicked. A small panel popped open to reveal a steel hatch. No lock, just a hidden ring. "Lacey, we've got a sublevel." "I'll cover," she said, raising her weapon. The hatch creaked as Luke pulled it back. Ranger hesitated only a second before descending first, disappearing into the darkness below. The stairs led to a low concrete bunker. Files were scattered across a metal table, handwritten ledgers, flash drives, ink-stained ledgers in Russian, Spanish, Arabic. The scent of mold and burned wires lingered, but none of that is what made Ranger growl. At the far end, beyond the shelves, was a shadow. A man stepped forward from the gloom, dressed in plain clothes, faded jeans, black turtleneck, but with the unmistakable rigidity of someone trained to kill. A long-barreled rifle rested across his chest, and his left hand was already moving toward the scope. Luke dove behind a steel filing cabinet. The first shot rang out, exploding the corner of the wall where Luke had just stood. Dust filled the air. "Sniper, in the bunker!" Luke shouted into his radio. "Engage! Now!" But before Lacey's team could respond, everything slowed. Ranger moved. The shepherd didn't bark. He sprinted forward like a shadow. Low, fast, direct. The sniper hesitated, only for a second, but it was enough. His second shot went wide. Then Ranger was airborne. He collided with the man's arm just as the gun fired again. The round hit the ceiling. Ranger's teeth sank deep into the attacker's wrist, dragging him off balance. But the man wasn't alone. His backup stepped from the shadows behind a cabinet, raising a sidearm. Luke fired first. The second man dropped. But the first, already bleeding, managed one last desperate move. He swung the rifle downward, barrel catching Ranger in the side before collapsing to the ground in a heap. The crack of bone echoed sickeningly. "Ranger!" Luke shouted. The dog whimpered, staggered back, then collapsed near the table. Luke was already at his side, dragging him into cover. Blood seeped from the shepherd's side, a deep puncture just below the ribs, but his eyes were open, alert, still watching Luke. "You did good," Luke whispered. "You're not going out like this." Lacey's team stormed in seconds later, securing the bunker, cuffing the wounded sniper, and gathering evidence. The flash drives were collected, the files tagged, but Luke didn't care. All he saw was Ranger, trembling against his chest. Hours later, the surgical lights in the emergency vet clinic glowed like interrogators' lamps. Luke sat outside, hands red with dried blood, not his own. His jacket lay across his lap. Lacey paced the hallway, chewing on the end of a ballpoint pen. They didn't speak. The door finally opened. Dr. Kate Morin, the town's veteran veterinarian, emerged. A tall woman in her early 40s, with deep crow's feet and short auburn hair tied back in a loose bun. Kate had the kind of presence that could quiet even the loudest chaos, a mix of steel and quiet kindness. "He's stable," she said. 2 cracked ribs, 1 partially punctured lung. He lost a lot of blood, but he's a fighter. It'll be weeks before he's running again, but he made it. Luke exhaled, his shoulders collapsing inward. Kate placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "I've seen war dogs come in broken, but that one, he didn't cry once." Later that night, as rain pelted the hospital roof, Lacey returned from her office with something clutched in her hand. A flash drive, silver and unmarked. "Noah found this," she said. "It was buried in the bottom of Heather's old satchel. Kid said he thought it was just junk until he noticed the camera label." Luke took it, slotting it into his laptop. The footage flickered to life, grainy, shaky, taken from a hidden angle. Heather sat at an outdoor cafe, sunglasses low on her nose. Across from her, a man, mid-40s, slicked back hair, expensive blazer, and a ring with the U.S. crest etched in black stone, handed her a thick envelope. Cash. She didn't speak, just nodded and took it. Luke paused the video, zoomed in on the hand. The crest was unmistakable. The man had ties to Mr. K's old network, federal muscle gone rogue. "She was in deeper than I thought," Luke said quietly. "But this breaks it open." The courthouse steps of Cedarfield had never seen a crowd this large. Under a sky brushed with early spring clouds, citizens gathered in solemn clusters. Retirees clutching small flags, children on their fathers' shoulders, K-9 officers in formal vests, and old-timers in folding chairs, all waiting, not just for a verdict, but for a reckoning. Inside the courtroom, the temperature was cooler than the air outside. Rows of wooden pews creaked as people leaned forward, breath held. Luke Morgan, now clean-shaven, in full uniform once again, sat quietly at the front beside Lacey, her hair now slightly grayer, but her presence no less commanding. The jury foreman stood, voice steady as he read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Mr. K, whose real name had turned out to be Vincent Calder, didn't flinch. Dressed in a tailored gray suit, his salt-and-pepper hair slicked back, he merely tilted his head as if listening to an unfamiliar language. The ring with the U.S. crest had been confiscated, his bank accounts frozen, his network exposed by layers of digital evidence, witness testimony, and a dog who never forgot. Heather Moore sat 2 rows behind, flanked by federal marshals. She had cut her hair short, and the once sure sharpness in her gaze had dulled. Though she hadn't pulled the trigger, her name was now permanently attached to a federal conspiracy charge. She would serve her time in a minimum security prison. No applause, no banners, no goodbyes. Luke didn't look back at her once. 1 year later, the town of Cedarfield came alive under sun and blooming dogwoods. The public square had been cleaned, the courthouse steps polished, and at the center stood a newly built granite pedestal with a bronze statue of a German shepherd in full K-9 vest. Ranger. He stood beside Luke, now visibly older but proud, his fur dotted with silver around the muzzle, a small scar still visible on his side. Though retired from duty, he remained attentive, tail calm, eyes scanning the crowd, not out of suspicion, but habit. He wore a ceremonial ribbon and badge on his collar, and a navy blue silk scarf tied neatly around his neck. Luke adjusted his tie. His uniform had been restored after a unanimous vote by the state board. Detective First Class reactivated. But today wasn't about him. He stepped up to the microphone. The crowd silenced. Luke looked over the audience, at families, students, veterans, and dogs sitting obediently beside their handlers. "When I came home," Luke began, "I came back to a house that had been abandoned, a badge that no longer had a name behind it, and a town that thought I was dead." He paused. His voice didn't waver. But there was one soul who didn't leave, one who waited, one who remembered. He didn't speak, but he never lied. Luke looked down at the dog beside him. "His name is Ranger." Applause erupted, not wild, but reverent, long and full. Luke stepped back, hand resting gently on Ranger's back. Then a voice rose from the side stage. Noah. Now 13, he wore a small navy blazer that was just slightly too big, sleeves cuffed once, hair brushed but still stubborn. A boy whose wide eyes had once watched a wounded canine from the backyard fence now stood behind a podium of oak, arms steady, cheeks flushed. "Hi," Noah said into the mic, a little high-pitched. "My name is Noah, and I used to sneak hot dogs through the fence for Ranger. At the time, I didn't know who he really was. I just thought he looked lonely." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. "But now I know. He's a hero. And heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wait for you." He lifted his left wrist. A thin leather band wrapped around it. Worn, frayed, but intact. It was a loop of the original collar Ranger had worn when Luke first found him again, repaired with a metal clasp and engraved tag that read, "Be the human a dog believes you are." "I made a promise," Noah said, voice clearer now. "I'll be that kind of person." He smiled at Ranger. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. The audience rose, not out of expectation, but respect. Later that evening, after the stage had been packed and the flags folded away, Luke and Lacey sat on the steps of the town square as dusk rolled in. Ranger lay between them, tail flicking softly. Lacey nudged him. "You did good, Luke." He didn't respond at first. Then he smiled. "I didn't. He did." In the distance, children chased each other through the square. The statue of Ranger gleamed under the streetlights, and beside it, etched into the base, was a single line. Some warriors walk on two legs. Others wait in silence, guarding what's left of your heart. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or light. Sometimes they walk on four legs, wait by an old iron gate, and never give up on you, even when the world already has. Ranger didn't just survive, he waited. He remembered. And in doing so, he reminded us all of something we too often forget. Faithfulness is a holy thing. This story isn't just about justice, it's about grace, about second chances, about a God who sends the right souls at the right time in the most unexpected forms. If you believe that love like this doesn't come from luck but from above, take a moment right now and type Amen in the comments, because someone out there needs to read it. Maybe someone who's lost hope. Maybe someone who's still waiting, like Ranger did. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, share it with someone who needs to believe again. Subscribe for more true stories of love, loss, and redemption. And may God bless every soul who's ever waited at a gate, and every one of you who's still holding on. Amen.